I swear, tech companies are just trolling us at this point. Like, why does macOS not exist on iPads? Why is Nvidia charging us $2,000 for a graphics card? And most importantly, why did KFC make a gaming console? These are just some of the dumbest tech decisions that were actually genius, and they just keep getting worse and worse. Like, what were they even thinking? Firstly, let's talk about the iPhone X notch. So in 2017, when Apple revealed the iPhone 8, they also had one more thing, which was a revolutionary iPhone X that removed the home button and introduced a notch. This was a special moment for Apple because it marked the 10th anniversary of the iPhone, so it was a big gamble to introduce something so controversial looking. Of course, at first glance, this thing looked pretty ugly because of this thing, and it still doesn't explain why they couldn't just make an even bezel like the Note 8, for example. In fact, Samsung even made an ad making fun of Apple, implying that the notch looked like a receding hairline. But then other companies started to copy the notch design. The Zenfone 5, LG G7, and the worst of them all, the Pixel 3 XL. The most disgusting looking notch we have probably ever seen. What's genius about this is that it immediately made the phone stand out among the crowd. At first, people were like, what the hell is this phone? But then after a couple of years, people were like, oh yeah, this guy has an iPhone. And it became iconic, hence why everyone copied it. What's interesting is that this phone launched for $1,000, which launched alongside the iPhone 8, which was $700. Of course, people were shocked, and when they revealed the price, the crowd was pretty quiet.
$999.
But most importantly, when you showed someone something so groundbreaking and revolutionary for $1,000 and then showed them a regularly priced iPhone 8, which was still a flagship, suddenly, in comparison, that phone looked really boring. And people that still had something like the iPhone 6s suddenly had a good reason to upgrade. And although the iPhone 8 was still good enough, the X was only $300 more, so you might as well. And Apple realized that people are willing to spend $1,000 on a phone as long as it looks new gen and you can flex it. And other companies noticed this too, because in 2019, Samsung launched the S10 Plus for $1,000. And then the next year, the S20 base model was $1,000, the S20 Plus was $1,200, and the S20 Ultra was $1,400. Samsung was actually going crazy. Apple basically raised the standards of what a flagship should cost, and other companies just went along with it. And speaking of Apple, they weren't just selling $1,000 phones. They also learned something far more dangerous. Why sell one product when you can sell two products that do the same thing? An iPad and a MacBook. Here's the thing, in 2021, Apple revealed the iPad Pro, which had an M1 Pro chip, which is the same as their MacBooks, which was a silly move because why would you need this much power in an iPad, which you're probably gonna use for YouTube anyway? And it wasn't just a one-time thing, because in 2024, they put the M4 on the iPad Pro before it came on their MacBooks. That was Apple's first time showcasing the new processor, and they chose the iPad Pro. Although it sounds absolutely stupid, it made the iPad sound really powerful, which it was, for no reason. But it did give them a reason to charge $1,000 for the new iPad. They couldn't just say, oh, here's the new design. They had to give people something that at least looked good on paper. But here's the dark part, even if you spent $2,000 on a completely spec'd out iPad Pro with the new Magic Keyboard, it still wouldn't be as good as a Mac. You see, a Mac runs the Mac operating system or macOS, whereas the iPad runs iPadOS. Apple lets the iPad pretend to be a Mac. You can download some Mac apps, use the Magic Keyboard, but it's still not a Mac. No macOS, no fan. It's basically still just an expensive YouTube machine. So why not put macOS on an iPad? Because they want you to buy both. What idiot would buy both an iPad and a MacBook if an iPad could fully become a laptop with a touchscreen that you could draw on, then take off the keyboard, take it to your bed, and watch your videos? Essentially, this genius strategy wasn't to make the iPad better or more usable, it was to sell it more, making you think that it's a Mac replacement when it really isn't. And then once you're blueballed and you wish you had a MacBook, you would just buy that as well. I know this sounds pretty obvious, but then Samsung lets their tablets become computers with decks, so why can't iPads do that? And now, let's talk about nothing. The company. that makes phones. So nothing was found by Carl Pei, the co-founder of OnePlus, which he left because he wasn't happy where OnePlus was heading, and so he decided to start a new venture. Calling his new company Nothing was the first clever move. He said that Nothing won't relabel someone else's products, possibly referring to OnePlus merging with Oppo. And looking at their first phone, it was unique, questionable. The specs were mediocre and the price also wasn't super competitive. But that wasn't really the point. They weren't competing for the best specs or prices because in such a saturated market, for a new company, this is pretty much damn impossible. Instead, they wanted to make something that was exciting and iconic and stood out. And it did stand out. It had glyph lights and a see-through design. And so the phone built up a lot of hype because it was called Nothing. People were constantly making cheap jokes, which was basically free marketing. And personally, I think this is genius because right now, specs don't really matter. Every phone basically does the same thing anyway. So for a company to focus so much on design, even having little details like even bezels and software reskins, it really made the company stand out to me. And fast forward to today, the Nothing 3A Pro looks very questionable, which again is hyping up the phone because everyone's talking about it. And on their YouTube channel, they hype it up by comparing it to the iPhone 16 Pro, blurring out the design, making people question how this phone is gonna look like, just for them to drop the design a week later, getting over 1 million views, all while having pretty boring specs on paper. Someone even described them as unconventional, hard to digest at first, but undeniably unique and beautiful, which I agree on. But what I don't agree with is Nvidia's pricing. So we all know that Nvidia makes GPUs which you put in your overpriced PCs which you play Minecraft or Marvel Rivals or whatever the kids play these days. But the new generation RTX 5000 is pure tragic. They made us wait over 2 years for these graphics cards, and calling them underwhelming is an understatement. Their top tier model, the 4090, used to cost $1,600, but the new gen 5090 is now $2,000, although it does offer some mild performance increase. Meanwhile, the lower tier 57 Ti offered on average around 8% performance increase, while having absolutely no stock and often going for scalped prices for just under $1,000 when its original price is supposed to be $750. And the situation just gets worse when you look at the 5070 non-Ti. It was promised to have the $1,600 4090 performance for only $550, but it only managed to achieve that with AI frame generation, and in reality it performed exactly the same as the last generation 4070 from 2 years ago, with the same price and the same power consumption. So what's going on? Why would a company offer something so underwhelming and even disappointing that has no stock and no improvements over the last generation? Well, it's because they can. You see, their real competitor at the moment is AMD, and their graphics cards are usually not as good when it comes to features like DLSS or productivity. People usually see it as something that you buy if you can't afford Nvidia, almost like when people say, if you can't afford an iPhone, then you go for a Samsung, which is completely stupid. Anyway, if the underdog is your only competition, then why even bother trying? Sure, AMD graphics cards are pretty competitive at a budget, but if you go to something like a 4090, there's absolutely nothing to compare it with. And what this means is that the company can just charge whatever they want for it, as long as there's demand, which there is, and as long as people are willing to pay for it, which they are, because they have no choice. And if the features are better than the competition, then they don't even have to be competitive, because if people want those features, they will pay more, even if the value is out the window. Also, Nvidia simply doesn't care because they make so much money from AI. Companies like OpenAI that made ChatGPT used Nvidia GPUs to train their models. So Nvidia made tens of billions of dollars selling those GPUs. And if you look at Nvidia stock prices, right around the AI boom in 2023, it was around $20, and then a year later, it was $120. A 6 times increase in 1 year. But most importantly, let's talk about the KFC gaming console. So back in 2020, Cooler Master did a collab with KFC Gaming, What? It was supposed to look something like this, and it was promised to run games at 4K and 240 FPS while having a built-in chicken chamber that warmed up your chicken using the system's natural heat and airflow system. It was VR ready, it had ray tracing, it was basically a perfect console. The KFCONSOLE, yes, that's the name of it, got decent attraction on Twitter and even landed a news article on the BBC. However, despite all the build-up and hype, it just went quiet. The KFC gaming account on Twitter stopped posting in 2022, and the Cooler Master page doesn't have any information if this thing will even ever launch. It probably never will, but it was a cool marketing stunt nonetheless. Although they didn't mention how greasy your fingers would be if you tried gaming while eating fried chicken. And that was my list, and maybe companies are trolling us, or maybe they just know how to make us want things that we don't even need.